Alrighty, I got a few gems saved up. What should I buy? Ooh, these ones got some pretty artwork. Oh yeah, this one will do.
Hey, stop!
So Duel Links has been around quite a while now, and since its release there's been a total of 54 boxes introduced into the game, which for us boomers of Duel Links isn't that hard to process. But for you zoomers out there who are just starting the game or have only been playing for a few months, that can be a lot of content to try and work around your head. Well my friend, I've got the solution for you, in the form of 2 video value guides grading every single box ever released and letting you know what cards exactly and what archetypes are worth your time. So the video will be formatted like this. I'll go through each box in order, from oldest to newest, providing a grade on each box as I go. Keep in mind that Duel Links is a game based around power creep, so don't be surprised if the vast majority of the first 30 of the 54 boxes are all rated quite badly, as they have all been power crept for the most part, and the few that haven't probably have been reprinted into better structure decks. The grades will be from A down to F, A being the best, F being the worst. The grades will be based on 3 different card categories, all of which will have the cards shown on screen from each box, sorted into their respective categories. The first category is meta. This is not ranked meta, this is the highest level of play meta. This is tournament meta. All cards in this category have been taken directly from a self-updating guide posted on Duel Links Meta that shows which cards are currently used at the highest tier. So for example, if you're wondering why a card like Wall Disruption isn't in the meta section despite its popularity on ladder, it's because it isn't actually used all that much in favour of other trap cards once you reach the absolute highest tier level of play. The second category is viable. This category will be extremely vast, as I'm not sorting every card out individually into their own good or average categories. I'm just sticking them all in one. Meaning this category will have cards like For Hire in the same category as Super Heavy, despite there obviously being a huge difference between the two. I'm not going to rate each card individually, I'm just going to rate each box, and tell you which cards are viable. And the final category is Fun. This category didn't weigh in on my rating decision of each box quite as heavily, as although it's important to enjoy yourselves, you definitely enjoy yourself more when you are winning. And gimmicky fun decks are only fun when they are still gimmicky and new, and you generally get bored of them pretty quickly. But it's still important to note that they are there. Final thing to note with each category is I didn't include every single card of every single archetype, as it would be pretty ridiculous to provide screenshots of them all. So if you're wondering why I'm missing a bunch of cards from a box, it's probably because I already have one of the other cards from the archetype shown on screen. And without further ado, let's get into the guide. Also, if you do find this guide at all useful, please leave a like, as this took a lot of time to make. 52 infographics is a lot of infographics to make up. And also consider subscribing, especially if you want to be notified when I upload part 2 tomorrow. First up, we got the Ultimate Rising. Easily a D. This box generally has one thing going for it, and that is Sphere Kuriboh. It's not only one of the oldest cards in the game, but also the oldest card to still be meta relevant to this day. The card has gone through every single meta and has still managed to find its way to the top tiers, so this card alone brings some value to the box. But outside of that, the only actual meta relevant card is Fusion Gate, and even then it's only used in the less popular build of Cyber Dragon, so it's not required to make the deck it's actually used in. The box has some viable cards. Order to Charge and Elephant's Gift are great for normal monster decks, Magical Hats has had its time in Ancient Gear, Sonic Bird is great for ritual deck consistency, and Secret Pass is actually limited due to the OTKs it can enable. Sadly though, none of these cards I just mentioned are even being used in rogue tier decks currently, meaning they're not really worth any kind of investment for the long term, outside of maybe Sonic Bird. The box does contain Karate Man OTK, which is one of the old classic OTKs you would have seen on my channel, and also one of the biggest memes in Axe Raider. But they most definitely shouldn't sway your decision here. I'd give this box a miss unless you're desperate for Kuriboh. The second box on the list is Age of Discovery, F tier. The box has 0 meta relevant cards, and the only card I would even consider viable is Moray of Greed, and even then it's a bit of a stretch, as I've barely seen it used. The archetype does contain some fun cards such as Sujin, Occasion and Sangun, Piranha Army for some nasty ODKs, and of course Daedalus for some digging for nostalgia. But honestly, skip the box, there's nothing here. The third box is Neo Impact, D+. This box again has 0 meta relevant cards, but its viable card pool is quite decent, containing Senju and Dijin, which are great ritual deck buffs, as well as some good back row in Mirror and Halfshot. Stampede Destruction is also pretty nice as a Cosmic Cyclone substitute in Dragon decks, and Sprite's Blessing is a pretty nice ritual spell as it can be used to substitute with all light monsters. Keep in mind though that this card was reprinted elsewhere. As far as fun is concerned, this box has Magical Merchant, which has always been a great card for meme decks that require a lot of cards in the grave, but nowadays we have Light Sworn, so this really doesn't compete. Starbow Seal is nice in some OTK decks such as Karate Man, and Galdolf can make for some pretty entertaining board wipes. But if you're getting this box, you don't really have an archetype worth investing into, so you're basically only paying for the 6 viable cards, with 2 only actually being played currently, Senju and Mirrorwall. So you won't actually be getting much value out of the box. The fourth box is Flames of the Tyrant, F tier. 0 meta cards, and honestly, I had to really stretch for these viable options. Sergeant Electro is basically a weaker version of Breaker the Magical Warrior, which used to be a card that was actively played, but has fallen off drastically. Legion can be a decent searcher, and the Agent of Creation Venus can generate some pretty nuts card advantage, but both haven't seen any real play in God knows how long. The deck has got Warm Worm and Shallow Grave for those of you that do enjoy Mill archetype, as well as Pokey Draco for you Guns fanboys out there. But in general, this box has clearly got absolutely nothing to invest into and you should probably skip it. The fifth box is Malcrys Rage, D tier. This box does contain 1 meta relevant card in Divine Wrath, but its effect is honestly quite generic and can easily be replicated by the card effects, and therefore substituted. In terms of viability, the box doesn't really have anything that is used currently, but it does have some usable cards. Escape the Dark Dimension is great in decks that can self-banish. Doldman is a good substitute for Cosmic Cyclone and other generic back row removals. Soul Exchange is a good tribute removal spell, as well as good support for tribute summoning decks. Xingzan Ru is a solid lockdown card, and Wild Tornado is usable in any deck that can destroy its own back row. The box also contains the Unhappy Girl, which I put under fun as it's used in one particular farm deck, and I didn't really know where else to put it. In summary though, the only meta card in here is easily replaceable, and no other viable cards are rarely used in the current day, so it's easily a skippable box. The sixth box is Wonders of the Sky, F- tier, and probably the second worst box in the game. The only decent card in the entire box is a Pointer of the Red Lotus, which did randomly pick up in play rate and was a top tier card a few months back due to its ability to disrupt your opponent while simultaneously activating your skills, but sadly its lifespan was short lived and now it's barely seen. Outside of that, there are 2 funish cards in maybe Magician of Black Chaos and the Atmosphere that I personally have gotten some enjoyment out of in the past, but definitely not enough enjoyment to warrant touching this box in today's day. The seventh box is Chaos Compliance, D tier. Again, no currently active meta relevant cards, but at least has a fairly decent viable pool. Fusion Sage is a great deck thinner and searcher. Fusion Substitute can have its benefits over the normal poly. Gateway to Chaos is a staple in any Gaia or Blackluster deck. Monster Reincarnation actually sees some play in the current Spell Specialist Light Sworn decks. Baby Ceresaurus is staple for Dino, and Blackluster Soldier is of course staple for Blackluster Soldier decks, which received some updated support only a few months ago. In terms of fun, the box does have the Gemini boss monster Gearfried, but it's a shame that Gemini as a deck really shows its age nowadays and can't really be called anything but fun as opposed to competitive. It also has Master of Oz in the box, which is really good for the Aussie memers out there, and Brain Research Lab, which can be pretty fun when interacting with cards like Cyberstein. Although the versatile pool isn't that bad, the fact the box itself doesn't really have a viable archetype anymore by itself makes it a pretty low value purchase, as you won't really be making any decks from this box. You're basically only aiming for the few viable cards, and considering that other than maybe Reincarnation and Baby Ceresaurus, you probably won't see any of the other cards, it's probably worth giving a miss. The eighth box, and by far the worst box, is Land of the Titans, Z tier. Honestly, the only card you guys have probably ever played or even seen is Needlebug Nest, and that card wasn't very good before Lightsworn was released. Now Lightsworn exists, you'll probably never see this card, and if you do, you shouldn't, because there should never be a comparison in terms of cards that can send deck to the graveyard, when Lightsworn is clearly better. Obedient Schooled is essentially a 1 card synchro summon of any level 6 or lower beast, but sadly, we don't actually have any real targets for this. And Ammo Release is something you can send to the grave if you need an extra tribute summon of a monster, but nowadays tribute summoning is basically irrelevant, so therefore this card is also basically irrelevant. The only other card I would even consider in this box is Gearfried and Nico Main King, purely because they are used in dumb infinite loops that are really bad but quite amusing, which by the way there's a video on my channel if you're curious. Basically, don't ever touch this box, there is absolutely nothing here. The 9th box is Crimson Kingdoms, and the first actual decent box of the list. C tier. The box contains 2 meta-relevant cards in Goki and Ultimate Providence, which are both extremely versatile cards that can be put into a ton of decks. Goki a little less so since it's limited to only zombies, but this meta is run by zombies, and if a zombie deck exists, this card is most likely a staple. As far as viable cards are concerned, you have the first half of the Buster Blader archetype in this box, which is a deck to always watch closely, especially if you are a dragon player, since it has been known to be the dragon counter deck. The box also contains Red Eyes Wyvern, which is a one-of in any Red Eyes deck, as well as Dakochi, which is used in Desperado. It also contains Demise the Land, which is a good field spell searcher, as well as Spellbook Organization, but both of these are reprinted later anyway. The box even has some fun cards, with Red Eyes Zombie Dragon for the die-hard Red Eyes fans, Give and Take for some special summon lockdowns, and Elephant Statue for a Dark World OCK deck. The only thing keeping this deck back from being a higher tier is Buster Blader not only being kind of out of meta right now, but it also being only half a deck, since it's split into 2 different boxes, so you'll need to go through an entire another box if you want to get the rest of the deck, meaning this box doesn't actually have a complete archetype for you to use, but overall not a bad box, especially if you hate dragons. The 10th box is Dawn of Destiny, and with this the return of the garbage, D+. This box has currently no meta relevant cards, but does have a fairly decent viable pool, which does include the Fire King cards, which are honestly not that bad. Unfortunately for this box, all the Fire King support has since been reprinted in a structure deck, making them a lot easier to obtain, making any Fire King related card in this box, including Sacred Phoenix, a lot less valuable. Other than that, the box has Hex Sealed Fusion, which is a pretty decent fusion substitute monster. It has some extra ninja support, it has Super Rush Headlong, which is a great back row card, but again, it was reprinted in a sale later on. On the bright side, this box also has Naturia, which is a pretty fun and cheap deck, as well as good Goblin Housekeeping for farm decks, but honestly, if you want most of the good stuff from this box, just buy 1 copy of the Return of the King structure deck. It's basically got the majority of the stuff in there, and just don't touch this box. The 11th box is Electric Overload, F+. The best card in this box is probably Treeborn Frog, as it can be sent to the grave by Neos Fusion in any tribute summon deck such as Monarch, but currently all tribute summon decks are pretty bad, and have been for a long time now, making this guy pretty irrelevant. Ninjutsu Arts of Transformation is an absolute staple in ninja decks, and ninja decks cannot run without it. Too bad ninja are also pretty average, and all relevant ninjas are sitting in another box much further down the line. As far as fun goes, this box does contain Monarch, the XYZ fusion monsters, not to be confused with the Xyz monsters, the Frog archetype, the Crusader, and Dicefoon, which isn't really a fun card, I just wanted to put it in here. It's essentially a desperate budget version for Cosmic Cyclone. Basically, don't touch this box unless you're a die-hard ninja fan. The 12th box is sadly a lot like the 10th box, only much worse. Echoes of Silence, F-. Just like the 10th box, this one falls victim to reprints, as the main archetype for this box is Silent Magician, only it's not only missing the best Silent Magician card, but the best Silent Magician card can be purchased along with every other Silent Magician card in this box in a separate structure deck. And I honestly feel that without this structure deck, the Silent Magicians in this box are pretty unplayable anyway. The only 2 real saving graces for this box outside the Silent Magicians is Limit Reverse and Massive Morph, which are both fairly decent back row cards that can be used in a variety of decks, but are basically outclassed by today's back row options anyway. Spell Power Grasp is also a card that I think could be good, but it's hard to say when there isn't really any good spell counter deck in Duel Links for me to try it in anyway. But hey, at least the box contains Green Kappa, which is a great meme for any of you Twitch users out there. Follow me at Duel Links BD, stream at the top of the description. The 13th box is Generation Next, C tier. This box contains one of the most sought after back row in the game, Floodgate Trap Hole, as well as Bacon Saver, which is used in almost all graveyard decks, which is currently the meta we see ourselves in. In the viable options, we also see Samurai Skull, which is basically a discount Gozuki, which is a meta card we spoke about earlier. We have King of the Swamp, which is the best fusion substitute monster in the game, as it can also search for poly, as well as some extra fusion support, like Defusion, Fusion Tag, and Fusion Recycling Plant. We also got some extra ninja support, and as for fun cards, we got our first lot of worm cards, as well as Horus, which is a very aesthetically pleasing art type. We also got 5-headed dragon, which is a great challenge to try and summon. Overall, not a bad box. Only thing really keeping it out of being the top tiers is an actual art type to try and dig for, since the only cards in here are just valuable cards like staples and extra support, but not an actual deck to play. The 14th box is Servant of Kings, D+. Now this box contains some really decent viable options. World Disruption, Forbidden Chalice, Birthright, and Painful Decisions are all cards you might have seen before, as they all get a fairly decent amount of play, even in today's ladder. And System Down is a card that sees quite a bit of play as a side deck in tournaments, especially if machines are heavily in the meta, such as the last one, where Crystron was the best deck in the game. But sadly, just like the last box, there's no actual deck for you to build into with this, not even a fun one. And on top of that, there are 0 actual top meta cards in this box. I will admit, Wall of D comes pretty close. The only actual monster in this box that I might consider wanting is Dark Magician of Chaos, as he can be special summoned out by a quick play spell, to make a pretty fun low TK. I personally would avoid this box, as the few viable staple cards in here are basically just tech cards you can live without or replace, and they're definitely not worth it when you can invest into better boxes and just get better back row anyway. The 15th box in the game is Galactic Origin, C-. So right off the bat, this box contains the single most popular card in the game, Cosmic Cyclone, as it's the best back row removal in the game that can also help activate any of your skill life point requirements. This already boosts up the box quite a bit, but I will point out that there is a sale in game that you can use to obtain Cosmic Cyclone outside of this box if you are willing to spend a bit of money. Outside of the single most popular card in the game, we also have some Fire Fist support, Neospacian support, Into the Void, Defusion, and Saphira, which is a card you might recognise from the old Cyber Angel days. This box also contains a lot of the Gladiator Beast support, but this was once again reprinted in a structure deck, again lowering the value of this box. If it weren't for the Cosmic Cyclone sale and the Gladiator Beast structure deck reprints, this box would easily be a C+ in terms of value. So if you have no interest in spending any money at all, or don't want to buy a structure deck, this is probably an okay option for you. The 16th box is Blades of Spirit, D+. Sadly, a lot of this box has simply been power crept. Hazer used to be a pretty strong beatstick archetype, but nowadays I would struggle to even call it rogue. It's got some of the 6 samurai archetype, but unfortunately, not the powerful side of the archetype. That came later down the line in a future box. It has some decent back row in Powerful Rebirth, and some more decent back row removal in Fire Formation Goki and Parallel Twister, and for those of you that like elemental heroes, this box also has a couple of Neos Fusion monsters. But other than that, the only fun cards I could see in the box was 3 of a Kind, which I've used a couple of times as a dumb way to remove stuff in some fun decks. Overall though, there isn't anything really in this box that you'll ever really need to play the game. The 17th box is Primal Burst, but sadly, despite having 2 cards that are currently meta relevant, it's still a D. The 2 meta cards in here are Volcanic Shell and Lila, both of which are pretty easily replaced. Lila is only used because it's the best Light Sworn spellcaster, as that's exactly what Witchcraft is synergized with. But it's not the only Light Sworn spellcaster in the game, it's just the best one. There's also other Light Swans in this box, but none of them are really usable. Volcanic Shell might be a bit harder to replace, as I don't think there's actually an effect that matches its own, but at the end of the day, it's only being used for a fire monster in a deck that needs fire monsters for invocation. I'm sure you can just play another variant of invocation anyway, and if you do need a fire monster, there's plenty in the game. In terms of other viable cards in here, we have part of the Gem Knight archetype, and Forbidden Dress, which is probably the worst of the 3 dress cards, and isn't used very often. Shien's Dojo is also in this box, but this card is reprinted later on. The only two other cards I consider pretty fun is Snow for Dark World and Jirak Titano, which is a card I've made a few videos on now, as he's pretty much just a really fun boss monster. Overall though, don't be fooled by the meta cards in this box, they're not really all that great, and outside of that, there's not really much in here outside of maybe part of the Gem Knight archetype if you want to invest into Gem Knights. The 18th box is Resonance of Contrast, another Fallen box to reprints. D+. The ace of this box would be Red Eye Slash Dragon, only this card has since been reprinted in a structure deck, completely devaluing it, as even as a free-to-play player you can purchase just one copy of that structure deck, and you now have this guy in the extra deck. It does have a few decent viable options though. Void Trap Hole is a very popular back row card right now, Grace is a staple in Vampire, Snipe Hunter and Dawn Knight are both great in some of the more dated Blue Eyes list, and we have arguably the best Bujin card, Yamato, which is pretty good considering it comes with some other Bujin support as well. Sadly though, because this box contains reprints and half the other usable cards are just cards for an outdated version of Blue Eyes, which isn't even contained within this box, I can't really recommend this box to you, outside of maybe just trying to get a couple of copies of Grace to try and complete your Vampire decks. The 19th box on the list, and our first B- of the list, Abyss Encounters. This box contains the meta combo of Citadel Whale and Sea Stealth Attack, which is a combo that can basically fit into any water deck that ever becomes relevant, this time being Crystron. Probably the best part about these two is that they can either be a tech card for any water deck that you like, or you can simply make your own deck, stuff them in as the boss monster, and then build around them. The box also contains the majority of the Gishki archetype, including Gishki Chain, who is great in all ritual decks. It contains the majority of the Archfiend archetype, the majority of the Alien archetype, as well as Ties of Brethren. On top of this, it also contains a ton of fun stuff, like Downbeat, Moki Moki, Flying Fish, Mystical Piper, and Water Dragon, all of which can be used for a bunch of random meme decks. I highly recommend this box if you are a fan of water monsters. The only reason it's not really rated much higher than a B- is because it's missing a lot of the newer support for some of the small archetypes in the box, like Gishki and Alien, and the only actual current relevant cards in here are Citadel Whale and his duo partner, which are only usable in water decks and are easily countered by Cosmic Cyclone, which is the most popular card in the game, which was shown by the fact that Citadel Whale didn't show up for months until Crystron arrived. The 20th box is Rampage of the Forest. C-. This box was once a free-to-play player's dream, as you could obtain the entirety of a top-tier deck all from one mini-box with very few high-rarity cards. And that deck was of course Sylvan. Sadly these days Sylvan isn't doing so hot, and therefore neither is this box. I'd still rate it decently well, as it's a very free-to-play friendly box, and it does contain some decent spell and traps in the form of Patronade, Spike Shield, Core, and Memory Loss. On the fun side of things, it also has Cocoon of Ultra Evolution to summon big insect boss monsters, such as Metamorphosized Insect Queen, which is also in this box. But there isn't really any great targets for this card at the moment, hence it's more of a for fun thing at the moment. The box also has Arrival Rivals, which is a great card for Tribute Summon decks, but as we know, all Tribute Summon decks are pretty irrelevant in today's meta. The 21st box is Valiant Souls, which is our highest ranked box so far, standing at a B. Meta-wise, this has some fantastic cards. It contains Paleozoic Canadia, which is one of the most popular traps in the game, rivaling Floodgate ever since its release. You also have Masked Hero Enki and Masked Change, which surprisingly enough wasn't ruined by a reprint in a structure deck, because even though Masked Change was reprinted, they didn't reprint Enki. So if you ever wanted to play a top tier hero deck, you still have to dive in here. In terms of viability, we also have a bunch of options, like Eclipse Wyvern for Chaos decks, Dark World Dealings, Double Cyclone. We also have some great traps in Needle Sealing, Fusion Reverse, as well as a bunch of other paleos. We also have Karakuri support and Amazona support, which are both pretty solid decks. And to top it all off, we even have two different archetypes that are quite fun to play even if they are not quite competitive anymore, Fabled and Gaia. The box even has some extra elemental hero support monsters, Vision Hero Witch Raider, and Fires of Doomsday, which are all solid cards if you want to build something dumb. If you enjoy heroes, you'll probably have to go into this box eventually, but do be warned, to make heroes you will have to go through a lot of different boxes. At least this one comes with quite a few bonus cards whilst you're at it. I think that's the main reason I decided to rate this only at a B. is purely because the main art type is going to be Mask Change, and you do have to go into other cards outside this box to build that art type. The 22nd box is Visions of Ice, C+. So the main focus of this box is of course Spellbook. This box used to be pretty top tier just like Sylvan due to how free to play it was to obtain a top tier deck. But unfortunately, the only reason Spellbook didn't drop off like that did isn't because it stayed relevant as it was. It just became a lot more expensive, with Silent Magician being a basic requirement for it, and that's in a structure deck, or a couple of new ultra rare Spellbook cards from some of the latest boxes. The deck as a standalone isn't all that bad though, and it's definitely still relatively playable, and this box does come with Treacherous Trap Hole, which is arguably the strongest trap in the game, as well as a few other monsters such as the Tricky, Dragons of Ice, and Blizzard Princess. The box also contains some random Gusto support, which is a pretty fun art type to get into.
Hey, big brother, can I watch SpongeBob?
Shut up, Mokuba. I'm busy flagging YouTube videos to compensate for the fact that I have an extremely small penis.
Oh.